Most mornings don't feel dramatically different after 50. The alarm sounds the same. The kitchen looks the same. The coffee smells familiar. But sometimes there's a quiet heaviness that didn't exist years ago. Not exhaustion exactly, just a slower start that many people blame on age. I used to think that too, until I realized that some of the smallest morning habits were quietly draining more energy than I expected. I remember a period when my mornings felt rushed even when nothing urgent was happening. I would wake up, go straight into autopilot, and wonder why my focus felt uneven by mid. This isn't medical advice or a strict system. It is simply a collection of small observations that started making sense once I began paying attention to patterns, instead of assuming everything was normal. After 50, the body doesn't necessarily weaken, it just responds differently to the same routines we've carried for decades. There's a simple explanation behind many of these shifts. Sleep cycles often change subtly with time. Hydration becomes more important than we realize, and stimulation, whether it's caffeine, light, or stress, tends to linger longer in the body. None of this means we need complicated solutions. It only means that habits that once felt harmless can quietly start influencing how steady our energy feels throughout the day. This is where small habits start to matter more than we think. Not in a dramatic way, but in quiet adjustments that reshape how mornings feel. One of the first mistakes I began noticing was checking my phone immediately after waking up. It felt harmless for years. Just a quick glance at messages or news while the coffee brewed. But over time I noticed a strange tension starting the day. Almost like my mind was racing before my body had even caught up. After 50, the nervous system sometimes reacts more strongly to sudden stimulation. Bright screens and constant information first thing in the morning can pull you out of a calm state too quickly. A simple adjustment that worked for me was delaying that first scroll by a few minutes. Sitting quietly, even briefly, made the transition from sleep to awareness feel smoother, as if the day had space to begin gently instead of abruptly. I also noticed that when I replaced that first phone check with something quieter, like looking out the window or simply holding a warm cup, the entire tone of the morning felt more grounded. Another quiet mistake was drinking coffee too fast, especially before my body felt fully awake. For years, that first cup was almost a race, a habit built around productivity, but I began to notice that rushing through coffee didn't create lasting energy. It created spikes, followed by subtle dips later in the morning. What many people don't notice is that after 50, pacing becomes more important than quantity. Slowing down the first cup, slightly changed how steady my energy felt. The coffee itself didn't change. The way I experienced it did. Sometimes I would place the mug down between sips, letting the warmth linger instead of rushing toward the next task, and that small pause made mornings feel less pressured. Skipping hydration was another pattern that seemed invisible at first. I used to believe coffee counted as enough to start the day, but mornings when I drank a glass of water before anything else felt noticeably different, calmer, clearer. It's not about strict rules or perfect routines. It's simply recognizing that the body's balance shifts over time, and small gestures like hydration can support that balance without adding complexity. Even leaving a glass of water beside the kettle became a quiet reminder that mornings didn't have to begin in a rush. A fourth mistake that surprised me was moving too quickly into tasks without giving the mind a moment to settle. After 50, many people notice that mental transitions take slightly longer. Jumping from sleep straight into work or responsibilities can create a background fatigue that builds throughout the morning. I started experimenting with tiny pauses, standing near a window, breathing quietly, or simply noticing the light outside. These moments didn't add time to the day. They changed how the day felt from the inside. It wasn't meditation or a strict ritual, just a few seconds of stillness that helped my thoughts arrive more gently. Another subtle habit was eating breakfast too heavily or too quickly without noticing how it affected energy levels. For years, I assumed a large breakfast meant sustained energy, but sometimes it created a sense of heaviness that lingered. After 50, digestion can feel different depending on timing and portion size. Small adjustments, lighter choices or slower pacing made mornings feel less rushed and more balanced. It wasn't about restriction. It was about awareness. Paying attention to how certain foods felt an hour later became more valuable than following any fixed rule. One mistake that often goes unnoticed is sitting for too long early in the day. Many mornings begin with a chair at the table, at the desk, or in front of a screen. I realized that even gentle movement, like stretching or walking briefly around the room, helped wake up both the body and mind. It didn't need to be exercise in the traditional sense, just enough motion to remind the body that the day had begun. Sometimes I would walk to the balcony or simply change rooms, and that small shift made the morning feel more alive. And finally, one of the most surprising patterns was how internal pressure shaped my mornings. Expecting every morning to feel as energetic as it did years ago created a quiet frustration that drained more energy than any habit itself. After 50, accepting that energy flows differently can be liberating. Some mornings feel slower, and that's not failure. It's simply a different rhythm. Letting go of comparison with the past made mornings feel lighter, almost as if I had permission to begin the day at my own pace. As these observations started connecting, I noticed that none of them required dramatic lifestyle changes. They were simply small shifts in attention. Instead of chasing perfect productivity, mornings became more about steadiness. The coffee tasted better when it wasn't rushed. The silence felt more meaningful when it wasn't filled instantly with noise. Even the sound of the kettle or the quiet hum of the kitchen became part of a slower rhythm that felt more natural after 50. There were also a few small curiosities that stood out along the way. Natural light, for example, seemed to have a stronger effect than I expected. Opening a curtain or stepping outside for a moment created a subtle lift in mood that no device could replace. Music played softly in the background sometimes made routines feel lighter without adding pressure. Even the way the kitchen looked, a clean counter, a simple mug, influenced how calm the morning felt. These small details didn't transform life overnight, but they reshaped the atmosphere of the day in quiet ways. Another quiet discovery was how consistency doesn't always mean rigidity. Some mornings called for slower pacing, others felt naturally more active. Listening to those signals rather than forcing a fixed routine made the entire experience feel more sustainable. After 50, flexibility often brings more balance than strict discipline. It allowed me to adjust without feeling like I was breaking a rule, which removed a surprising amount of pressure. Looking back, none of these mistakes were dramatic enough to notice overnight. They were simply patterns that blended into daily life. But once I began paying attention, the differences became clearer. Energy didn't come from pushing harder. It came from removing small sources of friction that had quietly accumulated over time. Even small pauses between tasks felt more valuable than trying to do everything faster. Morning routines don't need to become complicated systems filled with rules. Sometimes, the most meaningful change is simply noticing what feels different and adjusting gently. Coffee remains part of my mornings, but it's no longer the only focus. The pace, the environment, and the mindset around the routine now feel just as important. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing that small awareness can reshape the entire day. If there's one idea that stands out, it's this. After 50, energy often becomes more about rhythm than intensity. Small pauses matter. Gentle starts matter. And habits that once felt automatic deserve a second look. Not because they're wrong, but because the body evolves in ways we don't always expect. The goal isn't to chase a perfect routine, but to create a morning that feels supportive instead of demanding. Maybe some of these morning mistakes sound familiar. Maybe others don't. That's perfectly fine. The goal isn't to change everything at once. It's to notice one small pattern and experiment with a quieter approach. Over time, those small adjustments can make mornings feel less rushed and more aligned with how life naturally unfolds after 50. And sometimes, that quiet awareness becomes the beginning of a steadier, more grounded way of moving through the day.